if you look at most people, a lot of them are not that creative. Like they just kind of copy what
It's true.
that's just kind of what other people are doing. If you ask them to write something creative, it's gonna be hard. It's even harder for LLMs.
Jarvis is operating at the world of ones and zeros and just like executing. We are so far from that.
If someone's paying you like say $100 an hour as an engineer, if you can spend $10 an hour every hour and become 20-30% more productive, that's totally worth it.
Welcome to the final episode of Backend Banter Season 2. Today I'm joined by YK Sugi, also known as CS Dojo. You might have seen some of he's got a few views on some of his videos. I mean, a few million views on, a few, I don't know, 100 of videos? How many videos did you publish?
About 100.
Yeah, 100 videos. Some of them with million plus views. I've been watching your channel for a long time. I know you're not publishing as regularly anymore. You've kind of transitioned into a career, but we're going to talk about all that. Thanks so much for coming on the pod, man.
Of course. First of all, I didn't know that this is the last episode of the season. That's exciting.
It will be, yes. I think this season's a lot shorter than first season. First season was 69 episodes. This one's going to be like, I think like 13 or 14 once we get them all published. But yeah, super glad to finally get you on the pod. Okay, so walk us through the chronology of like, let's just start at the beginning. When did you first start learning to code and why?
Oh, that's a good question. You like going way back then.
Yeah.
The first kind of concrete experience I had with coding was actually in a physics class. I needed to learn a little bit of MATLAB to do like physics like calculation. I don't know if people still use it. I guess some people still do. And I thought it was really interesting. I thought it's kind of like math. That was my first impression. And then I moved on to, a little bit of Python, a little bit of Ruby, JavaScript after that, TypeScript after that. And that's, kind of how I got where I am.
Oh, really? It's TypeScript. When was this roughly, like year-wise?
10, 11, 12 years ago. Yeah. I mean, I don't remember exactly when, but, around there. More than a decade ago, I think.
2016-ish, 2015, something like that. Okay, very cool. Yeah, MATLAB, my perception of MATLAB is that it especially was really popular in like traditional engineering, like electrical engineering, like I said, physics, math, like almost like non-CS departments at universities used MATLAB for programming stuff. And my understanding is it's become a lot less popular in the last like 5 years. Python has kind of taken a big bite out of MATLAB's like dominance over academia. So that's really interesting that you started there. Okay, so you started there, and then did you start the YouTube channel CS Dojo while you were in school? Kind of. If I remember correctly, I had already finished all my courses when I started my channel, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna turn it into a business. I'm gonna make a living off this thing. I was determined to do that. And I remember after a few months, I was like, oh, I'm running out of cash. I gotta like start my job. And that's how I started my first job out of university. Got it. Okay, so you were like full-time on CS Dojo for a few months, and then you were like, oh, actually, it's hard to make money as a YouTuber. I mean, I didn't kind of think to myself, it's hard to make money as a YouTuber. I just said, okay, I'm not doing it fast enough. Like you wanted to put out videos faster than you were, but just like couldn't keep up? So the idea that I had at that time is I would, make a Udemy course and maybe like a Pluralsight course, like different courses, and then kind of make a living off of it, with YouTube kind of on the side. Yeah. I think if I had like 12 months, I could have done it. I would have been able to start making full-time living. And that's exactly kind of what ended up happening, but I just didn't have enough time to. Like if you had runway, like if you had like savings for like a year, I see what you're saying. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it does take a while to build up the momentum. But like you did eventually build up the momentum. So did you just keep doing it on the side of your first job then? Yep. Got it. Exactly. That's exactly what I did. Got it. And that first job, where was that? That was at Google. Pretty good place to start. Yes. Not bad. Not bad. And I'm sure it added a ton of credibility to like your courses and content and stuff. Yeah, it's kind of a funny thing, right? Because I was already making those courses, and
the quality didn't change just because of where I was working, but I think there's definitely that perception.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so then you're at Google for a few years, and then you did some startups. Is that accurate?
So I worked at Google for 1 year. I worked on CS Dojo full time for about 4 years. And then I've kind of worked at a few different startups. I think where I am now is kind of the best fit I've had besides, CS Dojo. Like pretty much the second best job I've ever had.
Okay. CS Dojo being the first.
Yep.
And you said where you're at now, Sourcegraph.
Yes.
Okay, very cool. Now you were doing, correct me if I'm wrong, those startups that you were doing before Sourcegraph, you were not necessarily a product engineer. You were more doing DevRel? Is that also accurate to say?
Yeah. So the past few sort of full-time jobs I've had are all DevRel.
And
or pretty much
why?
all DevRel.
Like why DevRel over like product engineering?
I've always been interested in product and engineering. I think it just, like a lot of things I do, I've just been responding to what the market kind of wants me to do. And it's not, I don't want to say like in a too passive way, but when I see like there's a need for a certain thing in the market, I like to do that. And for the past few years, turns out these startups, DevTool companies kind of had a huge need for DevRels. And I think that's why I ended up doing them.
I mean, there's fewer DevRel jobs than there are programming jobs, but there's also way fewer developers that are qualified for DevRel jobs,
yep.
I would imagine, than standard developer jobs.
That's exactly right. And I would kind of love to get into, the details of that too, because what I've seen is, I think around like 2020, like around the COVID era, maybe a little bit before that, there was this explosion of DevRel jobs, right? Like, people are like, oh, what's DevRel? We need to hire DevRels. And unfortunately, after that, there's been like a bunch of layoffs. I feel like more than, regular software engineering jobs or even product jobs. So it's been like a huge kind of a roller coaster ride, I think, for the DevRel community at large.
Yeah, very feast or I mean, you could argue all of tech is very feast or famine. Like for the last 25 years, even longer, tech has been a very like, there's a bubble and then it crashes, and there's a bubble in something and then it crashes. Sounds like DevRel is definitely riding that wave. So were there like a lot of people that got hyped up to be DevRels in like 2021 that then...
Yeah, I think so.
Kind of the jobs dried up? Like, what do you do at that point? Do you transition just to, engineering jobs?
Yeah, honestly, what I've seen from other people is, a lot of them kind of got into DevRel, excited, and then they got, they burn out, or I guess some of them, get laid off, and then they transition into engineering. Sometimes they do transition into like other DevRel jobs, but it's kind of more engineering, I think, recently. In
your opinion, like, okay, I've met like two types of DevRels in my experiences over the last couple of years being involved in like tech Twitter and stuff. The first type of DevRel is someone like yourself, I would say, at least based on my kind of from the outside perception, is like someone who gets the technology, right? Yep. And then also happens to be like charismatic and a good communicator and likes to talk about it.
Right.
And so it's like a really good fit. And so the way I would describe like that type of DevRel, another good example is like Aaron Francis, although he's not really doing DevRel anymore, but he kind of was, or it was almost more dev education. But anyways, point is he's like an engineer. You're like an engineer, and now you want to go make content and educate about engineering topics. I've met some other people. I'm absolutely not going to name names or anything, but like... Right. It seems like the reason they're trying to get into DevRel is because they actually don't like engineering, but they still want to work in tech. So it's like a way to avoid writing code. And I'm just wondering if you've seen that and if that actually works, like if that is a strategy that actually works out long term.
Yeah, I mean, the second one is kind of a tough position to be, I think. Like if you have technical skills, worst case scenario, let's say you get laid off, unfortunately. You get a job as a software engineer. That's cool. You keep going. But if you don't have that like technical sort of background, foundation, like what's the value that you're providing? Are you just a marketer? Are you a content creator? There's value for that, for sure. But I think it's safer to have like strong engineering background first, in my opinion.
Hard skills are always easier to fall back on than soft skills.
Yep.
I think it's probably unfair for me to say that like soft skills are not as valuable as hard skills, because I don't necessarily believe that. But like, I don't know, the type of training and practice you need for soft skills, like it's different. Hard skills look good on a resume. That's the way I'd put it. Like hard skills look good on a resume. Soft skills, like you can't really put them on a resume. It's like good communicator. Like no one cares. Like,
okay, so here's kind of how I think about it.
Yeah.
If you have a hard software engineering, foundational background, then that's your hard skills. That's it's not necessarily easy to show, but they're demonstrable, right? And then there's this other aspect of DevRel, depending on the company, which is marketing. And hard skills there would be stuff like SEO. I would consider that as hard skills. And, blog writing, that might be like less of a hard skill, but still that's important. And, being able to like articulate your product and vision and strategy to the, audience you're targeting, that might be a hard skill too. Yeah. So I think there are like these two groups of hard skills, basically engineering, as a category, and marketing. But if you're just a DevRel with like no strong foundation of either of those, then I think that's the worst position to be. Like if you have either of those, that's like really strong, or like video production, something more niche, there's something there. But engineering and marketing, pretty much every company needs both of them.
It's kind of threading the needle between the two. That makes sense. So one thing you mentioned off camera before we started recording was that you've been doing DevRel, and now at Sourcegraph, you've been doing more and more product engineering. Right. Tell me why.
Right. So I kind of got into it naturally. I've been at Sourcegraph about 10 months now. And because it's a product I use myself, I would like send feedback, and I would sometimes even like send PRs and stuff like that. And kind of big turning point for me was this offsite, the company-wide offsite we had in Montreal. We had like, this company-wide hackathon. We had different teams. And my team decided to work on this particular feature. It's like an agentic feature that we decided to build. I was like, super passionate about it. I kind of, pushed the team to go in this particular direction. And that went better than I expected. Like it started as a little experimental hackathon project. It became one of the main things that we market now as one of the main features that we have.
What is it?
And
can you tell us?
Yeah. So it's, we call it agentic chat. Originally, we called it like deep coding, but the idea is like, it's able to kind of reflect on itself a little bit and kind of think about, how do I examine this code base so that, I'm able to, as an LLM, how can I answer the user's questions better? Do I need to perform a search? Do I need to fetch a file? And now it's kind of a common idea, but back then it was, a novel-ish idea, and people like it.
Yeah, a year ago, it was like, okay, GPT 4.0 kind of had just came out, right? Cody, correct me if I'm wrong, Cody is kind of like the GitHub Copilot alternative from Sourcegraph, right?
Yes.
So it's like inline completions and things like that?
Right. So inline completions, that's part of it. But the main thing I would kind of emphasize on is the chat at the moment.
Okay, yeah.
Because with chat, you can generate like longer pieces of, blocks of code.
Right. Okay, yeah. So I use Zed as my daily driver.
Right.
And yeah, like I've got my chat panel open on the right now, my file tree on the left, my code in the middle, and just constantly like bouncing questions off the chat model on the right. Okay. And this agentic thing, it sounds a lot to me like what I've just been playing around with yesterday, which is Claude Code, right? Where it's I'm typing a query, and like the first thing it's doing is like inspecting project files and seeing like, okay, what files do I need to go read so that I have additional context? Because correct me if I'm wrong, like the worst part of working with an LLM when you're actually trying to get shit done is giving it all the context it needs. Is that like problem number one with agentic AI?
I don't know if it's number one, but definitely top three.
Okay. What are like the biggest problems?
The biggest thing, which might be relevant to your audience, is like over reliance on it. You feel invincible, but you're not. Like, if you generate a bunch of code with AI, at some point you start produce like weird bugs and weird mistakes. So it's good to be careful. I feel like that's probably number one.
I've noticed that like AI is a pattern matching machine, and it's like really good at pattern matching. So when I'm writing like a longer function that has like maybe like a bunch of switch case scenarios, I write like the first two or sometimes just the first one by hand. And it's really good at completing like the next 6. And it'll do it in exactly the same style and form that I did the first one. But yeah, when it's like, just anytime I'm trying to get it to do something like from whole cloth is where the struggle ensues. And so I could see how like you just add a few bad patterns and then that's now the context. It like can proliferate kind of out of control. It starts doing like really weird stuff, which is why, I mean, for me personally, like my use of AI has been very tightly scoped to like almost the function level still.
Right.
And I have played with Claude Code. I have not played with, what did you say you called it? Is it Deep Cody?
Yeah.
What's your daily workflow like now? Are you using agentic AI like every day?
Yeah, I do. I use a lot of different tools, first of all. I just tweeted this out, but I think it's important to know different tools. You don't have to know like 5, but you should have like 2 or 3 favorite ones that you use. You might use ChatGPT for certain things, Grok for certain things. I've actually been using 2 tools in particular. Like I use other ones too, but I use Grok for any sort of problem I want to ask about by providing the right context. It seems pretty capable. And then Claude Code that you mentioned, which is great. I've still kind of just started experimenting with it, but it seems pretty capable.
Yeah, when did you get access? I got access yesterday. So this is the 28th that we're recording. I got access on the 27th.
I got access to Claude Code yesterday, or I started to use it. And it's pretty cool. Like I only used it for a few specific cases, but I like how it's able to like perform a search, and then like, if it doesn't get the right result, it tries like a different query, and then it keeps trying different search queries. So that's really powerful, I find. I honestly would recommend, like developers to use it just to see how it goes. And I think it's great for like increasing engineering productivity.
I like to split my advice sometimes based on what your goal is as a listener. So like some of our listeners are professional developers that are like looking to get better at their craft.
Right.
And some of our listeners are like trying to learn how to code. Right. And I think those are and not that you can't like learn how to code still while you're a professional developer, but it's like, I think you want to be in like one of 2 modes. Like mode 1 is like efficiency. Like how can I be a more efficient, more productive developer? And mode 2 is like, how do I learn this new thing that I'm not yet, that I don't yet understand very well? And I use AI very differently for those 2 things. Like when I'm trying to be productive, I'm using things like Claude Code, right? I'm copy pasting from Stack Overflow at times. Like, I mean, I still understand my code, but like the workflow's different than if I'm like trying to dig in and understand. And to me, something like Claude Code seems obviously much more useful to the people that are like just trying to get stuff done and be productive.
I think I've had a similar experience there with Claude Code in particular, and with stuff like Deep Cody and other things. I think it's important to learn the fundamentals well first, and that might sound boring, but what these LLMs are designed to do is they're designed to automate like your manual tasks, right? In my opinion, if you don't know how to do those manual tasks manually first, chances are you're going to get in trouble. So what I would recommend is, what I mentioned about like trying different searches, search queries, learn to do that manually first. Whatever IDE, you use, whether it's VS Code or anything else, your brains, you need to learn to kind of use the search tools that you have available. You need to learn to kind of find the right things to get your job done. And that seems simple, but that's not such a trivial, task or skill to learn. So I would learn that first. And then once you're like kind of comfortable doing it manually, then you can start to automate it with, Claude Code or any other tool.
We have such an interesting new problem with AI that I've noticed, which is like, okay, so if you've used a tool like Claude Code, just for those of you listening that haven't tried it yet, so it's basically like this CLI application, and you start it like at a specific spot in your project, and you say, hey, I want you to do something. And then it will like go and start looking at different files. And so it'll like look at your file tree, and then it'll go read specific files, and then it'll start making changes. Maybe, you know, it'll insert a line here, update a line there. And it's an agentic process, meaning it's like a multi-shot prompt. It'll like keep doing things until it decides that it's done or you kill it. And you're just getting billed like as it goes based on how many tokens are being used. And that's like such an interesting paradigm, because like you as a developer are sitting there, you're like, okay, do this thing. And then you like let it go, and eventually it comes back. And maybe what it did was useful. Maybe it wasn't. You've spent some amount of time sitting at your computer watching it do stuff, and that cost you some amount of money. And now maybe you have to start over and do it again. Like, it's just so weird. Like, the only thing I can compare it to is like 10 years ago, you would like maybe go down a rabbit hole of like Stack Overflow issues that maybe didn't end up anywhere useful, but like you weren't paying for compute. I don't know. It's a very new paradigm.
It's pretty weird, like especially with Claude Code, because you would probably end up paying, you know, a lot, like if you use it a lot.
Yeah.
So I think it's good to be careful, unless like your API key is provided by, you know, your employer or, you know, your client, whatever. Then that's great. You know, just use it to get it done. But it's really interesting.
Someone's going to eat the cost though, right? Like,
yeah,
at the end of the day, someone's paying for your electricity.
I think the way I see it is if someone's paying you like say $100 an hour as an engineer, as let's say like a, you know, senior engineer, principal engineer, whatever that might be, if you can, you know, use it, spend $10 an hour every hour and become 20-30% more productive, that's totally worth it.
Yeah, that's what's so interesting is like at what experience level, and like that's not even the right way to frame it. At what like productivity, different engineers have different productivity levels, and they're not static either. Like it kind of depends on what task, like, you know, maybe you have a specific specialization that you're really productive at. Or just to get like really crass, like, you know, you compare me to someone like the Primogen, like he types twice as fast as I do. So just like right out the gate, like my typing speed is kind of a limiting factor on how productive I can be. But what's interesting to me is like, I've always thrown around this like 20% number. And it was actually interesting to see, was it the OpenAI people? Some big organization recently did a study, and they found it was like roughly that. It was like, you know, these AI tools give you roughly a 20% boost as like a developer. But that's like so not, like that's changes so much task to task. And the thing that I'm curious about is like, who's it helping the most? Is it helping the juniors most? Is it helping the seniors most? Is it helping the mid-level developers most? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, my guess would be the senior principal, whatever, more senior people would be more productive because of AI.
Really?
Junior people, interestingly, they might get less productive depending on how they use it.
Okay.
If they're like purely focused on learning, and if they use AI to learn stuff, then they'll learn faster for sure. But if they will try to like reach for something they're not ready for, they might produce a lot of shitty code, and that's would be good.
That's true. Like if you don't know the architecture you're going for, right now you're biting off like giant projects that maybe you weren't ready for. You could spend a lot of time writing a lot of code that ultimately, like, the fundamental approach was just wrong. And you've got to kill that whole part of the system and start over. I definitely get that. And it's not even, like, I think sometimes we say, like, bad code. It's not even necessarily that just, like, the functions are written poorly. A lot of times it is that, like, the architecture was bad, and you needed to take a totally different approach. And the AI is not going to yell at you. It's just going to try to solve that next thing. It's going to solve the next function, solve the next method. See, you can go down some weird paths. Huh. Because it's interesting to hear you put it that way, because like at the system level, I think I would agree. Like the senior developer is going to get more value out of it because they'll be able to spot those like weird rabbit holes much easier, and they'll waste a lot less time. But at like like when you scope it down, I think my opinion would be the opposite, which is like when I'm just writing code day to day, I feel like all I'm really getting is like just good autocomplete. Like it's pattern matching for me. It's just helping me. Again, it's helping me type faster because I'm not like I type at like 80 words per minute. I'm not the fastest typer in the world. But it's not necessarily like the inline stuff I'm doing, the generation stuff I'm doing isn't like solving problems that I wouldn't have just been able to solve had I typed a few more characters. I do ask it like queries and stuff. Whereas like I feel like with a junior, you probably are, I would imagine, like getting a lot faster at like the like local level, like with, you know, completing the next function.
I think I want to sort of dig into it a little bit more. You use chat too, right?
Oh yeah. I use chat more than anything else, I think.
Right. So I'm curious how you focus on autocomplete more. Like autocomplete obviously important, but
I guess the reason I've focused more on autocomplete from like a productivity perspective is because most of my chats, they do save me time. I'm not like trying to say they don't, but like they would have been a Google search. So like where I used to maybe, you know, do 100 Google searches a day, now I do 20 and I do like 80 of them directly to a chat bot.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it doesn't save me as much coding time, but it does save me like some research time, is probably the way I'd phrase it.
It sounds like you don't use chat in like a code-based integrated way.
I actually do. So like I work in Zed and I've got my chat off to the right, but like I don't say, hey, generate me a function that does X. Like I never do that. If I'm going to generate code, it's usually just using the inline like autocomplete. Like I'll type the name of the function, you know, I don't usually do the comment thing. I usually just start typing the function because I already know what I want to make. So I just like start typing the function, then maybe it autocompletes. If it does, I look at it and let it autocomplete. If it's wrong, I keep typing until it like gets enough context to do the right thing. So like I just don't use chat to generate very much code. I basically use it to just like, you know, what's this method I'm looking for? Like, you know, it has like near infinite knowledge about a lot of documentation. Like that's usually pretty helpful.
Yeah, I feel like that might be sort of the next thing to try a little bit more. Like, you know, say, you know, you're looking at a file, you start with a single file, you say, okay, you know, I want to do this thing. But like instead of typing it, you ask chat. You can, like, what I sometimes do is I use, you know, like these voice to text systems. Like on my, you know, laptop, and then I say, I'm like, okay, can you change this thing to this thing? Sometimes it doesn't get it right. Sometimes I need to type. But I find that kind of workflow to be pretty helpful.
I probably haven't given it enough of a shot. Probably just because, like, you know, every time I give it a half-hearted attempt, I'm just like, it's just faster for me to just type it. But have you found that it's a lot faster for you to just like ask the chat to generate you code than to just start typing it in your editor?
It depends on the task, I think. If I'm generating like specific function, you know, like you mentioned, I remember this is from like a while ago, but I remember using something like GPT-4 Turbo or something like that, where I needed to generate a specific function, and it was something about like math and, you know, like vector embeddings. I wasn't too familiar with. Like conceptually, I knew what I was doing, but I never wrote that particular mathematical function. So I asked, you know, AI to do it in a format I specified, and it did it. Like if I had done it manually, it would have taken me like a lot longer, like at least a couple hours, because I didn't know how to do it. I knew it conceptually, but just by asking AI to do it, you know, it did it much faster.
I found a lot of value in using AI as like, I want like a really kind of punchy way to describe this, but like, it's like a smart friend that like you don't quite, and a smart overconfident friend is like the way I would describe it. Is like, I'll give it some code and I'll just be like, do you notice any problems here? And occasionally it will. And then it's like, okay, cool. I have something to look at, something to make sure I didn't get wrong. And then I'll dig in and actually like fix the problem or whatever. It's just important that like when I say that, people are like, oh, you're trusting the AI to like find all the problems for you. You shouldn't do that. I'm like, no, I don't trust it. Like I know this friend is overconfident. Like this friend is always speaking out their ass. Like but they are, willing to do what most people won't, which is like check every single line, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like a good cursory review on a lot of stuff. Like my prediction is like we're going to see a lot of like code review tools that come out with AI, where again, like it doesn't mean you can trust everything that the AI thumbs up, but like it will give you some thumbs downs that make you go, oh yeah, I should have done that a little differently.
No, I agree with that.
Interesting. Okay. What projects are you most excited about that you guys are working on at Sourcegraph in like related to AI?
Right. So we recently started to work on this basically newer version of deep coding that I mentioned. It should be able to, in my opinion, like I was saying, kind of like Claude code, right? Like it should be able to do a search, and then if it's not the right thing, it should do another search and keep trying, and then it should be able to like edit code. And the nice thing about it being in your IDE is that it has access to like these, diagnostic tools like compiler issues or style issues, stuff like that, where, that your IDE is able to catch. Your agent, in the code editor should be able to kind of pull that and say, okay, I noticed this issue. Should I fix it? Yes or no? Okay, let me fix it. So that's what I'm excited about.
It seems to me like statically compiled languages and like static tooling is going to get way more important with AI.
Yeah.
Because of the fast feedback loop you can give back to the AI.
100%. I mean, they have always been important, right? Like, when I think about, do you ever work with TypeScript?
I refuse to work with JavaScript, basically. Like, yeah.
Okay. That's what I think you might actually like TypeScript.
That's what I mean. Like I do a lot of TypeScript. Yeah. I base like anytime I see JavaScript, I elevate it to TypeScript like immediately. Yeah.
No. Yeah, that's been my experience. That's been sort of my experience too. Like whenever I work with TypeScript, I'm like, wow, like it's nice to have this type safety. It's already great to have without AI, but with AI, it's going to be even better.
So okay, Claude code. The names get hard, and dude, typing Claude into my terminal to start Claude code. I don't know about you, but I can't fucking spell Claude to save my life. Right. It's like the A and the U they throw me out. It was a bad name, but whatever.
Yeah. You could probably make an alias.
I probably should. Yeah. The default's just rough for me. I always misspell it first try. But okay, so Claude code works in your terminal. Like its abstraction layer is the terminal. It doesn't know about your IDE in any way. Now, it does have access, of course, to like a bunch of CLI tools. One question I have for you is like, okay, that's Claude code. Cursor's been around for a while. Cursor's had agentic features integrated into the IDE. Like, how do you compare those two? And then like, what are you guys trying to do different with like deep coding that you think like is, a big opportunity?
Right. So my personal opinion, right? Like first of all, I haven't used Cursor actually at all. Like I've heard a lot about it. Yeah, I know like I know like a lot of people like it. I have nothing against it. But there's that. And then there's Claude code. And the feedback, that I've heard from like internally is people like the agentic experience of Claude code for some reason. It seems pretty solid. So what I would be excited about is, like I said, bringing the type of experience you could get with Claude code in editor so that you have the advantage of this agentic experience, but on top of it, you have like, everything you get from your editor.
One thing that's really interesting to me is like, okay, so when I'm working in Zed is not like an AI. I mean, Zed has great AI tooling, but they're not like Cursor in the sense that they're marketed as like this AI editor, right? They're a really good editor, and they also have good AI tooling. And they've shipped some stuff that is nice. Like for example, when I'm in the chat on the right, I can like do /tab and it will include my current file in the context or whatever. There's like little quality of life things like that. To me, it seems like the right level of like ergonomics is very similar to the way like your in-editor LSP will work typically, which is like it kind of cares about the files that you have open and not as much about the files that you don't in terms of like what it's rendering, right? And so I would almost equate rendering to like active context. And I kind of wish that my chat just like had this, dynamic flowing like active context of whatever the fuck I'm looking at. Whatever I'm looking at, that's the context. And that way me and the bot are chatting on the same terms. Is that something that you guys are thinking about?
Yeah, so we have some of it already, but it's pretty basic. It's like, what file am I looking at? But what I've been like trying kind of the rest of the team to do is do more with it. Something like, okay, which tabs are open and which tabs do I need to like, look at further to answer this particular question. So if you ask a question about this other tab, then we look at this one. But by default, we only look at the currently open tab and make it clear. I think eventually we'll have that, but it's gonna take some time.
Well, one thing that's really interesting to me, and I'm sure you guys have thought about this way more than I have, but that's why we're doing this podcast, is you can think about your repository as like a collection of files. Sometimes that's like a really rudimentary way to think about it. It's right in the name, Sourcegraph. Your source code is a graph, right? Like I could imagine that the AI could like build on top of the LSP in a way that, like, for example, you're giving it a file, it reads in that file. Instead of like going to all the other files that are referenced, it just like, peaks definition, so to speak, in like LSP terms, right? And grabs the definition of like just that file, which would also save on like context space. Are those the types of things that you guys are building? Yeah,
so it's funny because a lot of these things we're kind of on the way there. And again, I've been personally trying to kind of push them, encourage them to go in that direction too. So one example is, a huge file. Like in enterprise settings, I've heard that there are, often these situations where you have a file that's like thousands of lines of code. And I don't even know if that's a good practice, but that's the reality.
Yeah.
And you can't fit everything in, context window. Or even if you
certainly
do,
not cheap. Yeah.
Right. Definitely not cheap. It might not be a good idea. So one idea I had was, why not look at the function and class signatures, feed that, and then ask the AI which files which classes, which functions do you need to look into further? Kind of the same way as tabs. So I think it's the way I see it, it's different ways of providing different tools to the AI, whether it's like opening this tab or examining this particular class. Or I guess, what you mentioned about like following references, implementations. I think that's going to be super powerful.
Do you think the growing use of AI in software engineering is going to lead to a further fracturing of like the tool ecosystem or a consolidation on like more standardized tools?
I'm not sure where that question is coming from exactly.
So, okay, yeah. Let me give you an example. So like, there's like, I don't know, a fuckload of different ways to write a front end right now, right? Choose React, Vue, Next, Astro, right? Like, so there's a billion options there. Backend, same thing. PHP, Laravel, Golang, vanilla, with a framework, without a framework. All the different IDEs you could be using, all the different tools. Like, there's just when you start a new project in 2025, that's like a web application, you have so many options. And so my question is like, does the fact that AI is now being used, is that going to further push us into like an even wider array of options? Or is it going to kind of pressure people to like use the same tooling, maybe because like the AI works with it better?
Yeah. So I can kind of break it down into different aspects of it.
Yeah.
So first of all, IDEs, we're already starting to see more IDEs. It actually reminds me of the time, pre-VS Code, right? Like whenever it was published, we had Atom, we had Vim. I guess we may have had NeoVim. I'm not sure back then. I guess we had, different, like a lot of different people were using different, editors. And there was no single dominant one until VS Code.
Right.
And I feel like we're back to this era. I mean, VS Code is still pretty dominant, but people are using Cursor, some people are using Windsurf, some people, using Zed. So it's like, maybe VS Code is not the dominant anymore. So that part is like still like a little bit fractured. I think eventually we're like expanding a little bit to different options. We'll probably shrink to fewer options at some point, but that's how I see it right now.
That makes sense for editors. Yeah. What about technologies?
Yeah, with like DevTools and other like web technologies and stuff. It's hard to say, but I guess the pressure will be to kind of consolidate into fewer tools, because let's say if I create a new JavaScript framework, front-end framework, first of all, nobody will want to use it, but nobody will want to use it even more because of AI. Like, if you ask AI about my new tool, no AI is going to be familiar with it. So it's going to be like an extra effort for me to get, or force anyone to get people to use a new tool like that.
So my default position is I tend to agree. Like, I think it will encourage consolidation, but I have like this one, I'd almost consider it like a kind of left field idea, which is that AI makes learning new stuff so much better. Like, we've seen this on Boot Dev. Like, when we integrated Boots, the chat bot, like, it just makes the learning experience so much smoother than it was just pre-AI. And so picking up new languages and paradigms, once the bots do have some like base level of competence in them, is way easier. So like if I want to pick up Lisp today, I'm going to have a way better time, or OCaml, right? A way better time than I would have had 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Because ChatGPT knows how to write it. So I am kind of curious if like, a lot of times the way programming languages get started is like by some like crazy enthusiasts who aren't particularly concerned with productivity. They're just like doing something cool. And like, that probably only has to go on for like a year before the models start getting trained on that stuff. I don't know. I don't know how like, it seems like right now there's always like a cutoff that's like almost a year old. I wonder if 3 years from now, the cutoff's going to be just like a week ago. Or it'll be like, Google's index that's like updated all the time.
I would love that.
And that could change the game. I don't know what would happen in those conditions, or if it would even matter.
Yeah. And one trick for now, like until that happens, is like providing, documentation to your AI. That's always helpful. Like, so what I do with, a new API, like sometimes I want to use the newest OpenAI API and stuff like that. Then I just copy and paste the whole thing, give it to AI. I don't even have to read it. It's nice.
I saw a standard, this was on Hacker News a while ago, that someone was proposing. Do you know what I'm talking about? It's like, it's like a file that is for the AI.
Yeah.
Do you remember what it's called? I can't remember.
I don't know. I guess the idea is kind of like robots text.
Yeah, kind of like robots. Well, okay, not like a file, because there's that too. Like a file on your website that says like don't ingest this for like AI. Yeah, that's like one thing. I'm talking about, there was another one I saw that was like almost like a readme.md for humans, but one that's for AI, so that like when you're working in your project, it's like, okay, hey AI, this is all the stuff that you need to know about this code base so that you can like help me more effectively. I wonder if we'll see a lot of tooling like that. Yeah, I mean that would be nice to have. So I think in the ideal world, AI should be capable of like reading, a documentation that's made for humans. You should be able to like navigate to different pages and stuff like that. But until that happens, that's a nice like, crutch to have. That's true. I mean, the whole reason these things have been useful is that we haven't really had to do too much specifically for them, because they just read and write like humans do, kind of. But that doesn't mean that, like the context window is still a whole thing. And so, passing structured data into the context window could still be useful. Huh. All right. What questions have I not asked you about AI that you find interesting and think that our listeners would want to hear about? So this podcast is called Backend Banter, right? Yeah. I might have a little of that. So I think there's this discussion about like, is
the structure of like different, code bases, is it going to change because of AI? And my answer back, like a couple of months ago was no. My answer is still no. I think a single file, a single directory is fine. If you want to have like a README file just for AI, cool. Have that. That's going to fundamentally change the structure of the code base. And I don't think it should. Like the way I answered it before was, with self-driving cars, should we change the structure of roads? I don't think so. They're designed for humans. They should be designed for humans first. And that's kind of how I see about, the code bases too.
I wonder if there'll be a transfer. Okay, so like just forget LLMs for a second, right? And go full sci-fi. Iron Man talking to Jarvis, like, hey, Jarvis, go do a thing. The output of like Jarvis's actions were never code files, right? It was never generated code that Tony Stark is then checking into Git and reading Jarvis's pull requests. Jarvis is operating at the world of ones and zeros and just like executing shit, right? We are so far from that. Like
Why
trusting.
would you want that though? That's crazy.
No, I know. I'm just saying, like,
yeah.
My point is, like, we're so far from that. I feel like some people do get like way ahead of themselves. Like, we're very, very far from like just giving an LLM the ability to just like shove instructions through a CPU and like do stuff.
That's just why. Who said that? That's such a strange idea.
Well, this is like, I'm pulling from sci-fi. This is like how AI always works in sci-fi, right? It's never the way we are currently engineering. But the point the story I'm trying to tell is like, if, and I'm not even saying that we get there within the next 100 years, but like if that is like the end result of AI, you have this really long transformational period where you have to go from like all the systems that humans are actually able to audit to like eventually a system that is completely unusable by a human at that level, like because you're so abstracted out of the picture.
Right.
And so all this to say, like, basically, I agree with you. Like every stepwise change in like how we do software engineering, there is a cliff, in my opinion, that we're not close to right now. That is where you go from like easily being able to audit the output of the LLM to a point where you no longer can.
Right.
And we're so far from that. Like even in a world where AI generates 100% of the code, if what's generated is still code, like JavaScript or Go or TypeScript, then you're still in this world of like auditing the code. Like you said, I don't know if we ever get there, but it's definitely what some AI bros on Twitter are talking about.
Okay, so backend banter, right?
Yeah.
These AI systems, they imagine they're super smart, and they say to themselves, humans have spent like decades building these tools, like these different languages, compilers, all these different things. They're like, I don't want to use them. I'm so smart. I'd rather build it myself. It's just so funny to me. Like if I'm such a smart being, I'd rather use something that humans have already built. Like it's easy.
The example of self-driving cars, like AI is living in a human world. Self-driving cars are driving on roads that were designed for humans. And if you really wanted like great AI, like fully autonomous cars, you would probably need, or I should say need, but like you would probably do better with roads that are built for the cars. The problem is the transition. Like that transition would be nightmarish because you'd have to like go cold turkey. So what I'm saying is like you can't have a cold turkey switch, and so you need an AI that works in the human system. And works really well.
Roads are fine in most developed countries. Roads work fine. You can drive on them. Like if I was a super smart AI being, why would I say, get rid of these roads? I need new roads just for me. It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, well, and certainly the way LLMs work right now, where they are, the reasoning capability of LLMs is like still kind of dubious in the sense that not like they can't solve problems. Clearly they can solve problems, but like to come up with net new ideas that have never been thought of before by a human, I don't think we have a lot of evidence of that. Like the creativity seems to be lackluster.
They can combine things, but that's about it.
Yeah, I've had a really hard time trying to get anything novel out of an LLM, which is also something that I think is largely misunderstood by like the less technical community talking about AI.
Yeah, that's also a tricky thing because if you look at most people, a lot of them are not that creative. Like they just kind of copy what that's just kind of what other people are doing. If you ask them to write something creative, it's gonna be hard, and it's even harder for LLMs.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Humans aren't particularly creative, and we train these things on us, and we're trying to get like top 1% performance out of all the crap we trained them on. Yeah, that's a good point. Very cool. Wow, we've been going for a whole hour. Thank you so much for taking the time to come on. Are there any last tidbits, any last bits of knowledge that you want to share with the listeners?
Right. So a couple of things. One is I did another podcast with Danny Thompson a while ago, and I think that one's like good, kind of a more practical thought on using AI for a large code base.
Cool.
If people search for that, they should be able to find it somewhere on YouTube, probably.
I'll be sure to link it down in the description. Yeah.
And the other aspect that we didn't cover, I think this is like a good intro discussion, but stuff that we didn't cover is more for like learners and people who are kind of nervous about this current economy and stuff like that.
Tell us what it is. We can take another 5-10 minutes. I just want to make sure I don't miss anything that you wanted to talk about.
Okay, so this is for in case you listener are in that situation. I think a lot of people are, obviously, like students, beginners are in that situation. They're like, oh, am I going to have a job when I graduate, or in a year, stuff like that. But even people who are more experienced, I've seen like on Hacker News and stuff like that, senior engineers, DevRels in particular, like I was saying, I think a lot of them are nervous. A lot of them are nervous, about the job market and, the future of this industry. Like, any thoughts about that, first of all?
Yeah, a lot of thoughts. I just wrote an article like 3 weeks ago as a follow-up. So just to give some context, a year ago, I wrote this article called 9 Months of GPT-4, Can I Fire My Developers Yet? And my conclusion was, no, I can't fire my developers yet. In fact, I'm currently hiring some developers. Nice. Like, I've given all my developers AI. They're a little bit more productive. On we go. And then a couple of weeks ago, I published another one called 18 Months of GPT-4. Like, can I fire my developers yet? Answer still no. We've grown the team. So my like just very high level take is current job market has a lot more to do with interest rates and state of the economy than it does AI. I think AI has been a huge red herring for a lot of people. I do think AI is going to really disrupt how we do work. I don't think it's necessarily going to disrupt the amount of work we need to do all that much. I think a lot of the layoffs have mostly been interest rates. So I'll just stop there and let you go on.
Okay, so that's interesting because that's exactly what I said a few months ago. That was actually another podcast episode on Freecode Camp. I think there's a majority of that is still that, but I'm starting to see signs where AI is actually starting to impact the job market.
Tell me.
It's hard to say, like, it's hard to unpack, like, when you look at kind of the number of jobs, but I kind of expected to slow down a little bit, like the layoffs, and I expected the market to bounce back a little bit faster, but it's like, looking at the graph and everything, it looks like it's struggling to bounce back. And I'm kind of thinking, is it because of AI? Like, I'm not 100% sure, but I think there's some of that, at least a little bit of that.
I remain open-minded to it. The main thing that I'm looking at the moment, not that like we're the perfectly efficient organization here at Boot Dev, but I feel like we're a pretty good case study in like what you can automate with AI, just because we are like trying everything.
Right.
You know, there's 6 of us on the team, and all we do is ship code and ship
Right.
content about code. And anytime we can use AI to do that better, and I say better because we're not going to like compromise our quality. And so, and we have not been able to make like, certainly nowhere near the amount of productivity gains you would need to like start cutting engineers. In fact, if anything, we're seeing productivity gains. And so we're hiring more people because they can get even more done. It's like a whole nother thing. And so like, that's why my position is still, I think it's interest rates. And I think it's the economy. And I guess I will just say the other reason is because the economy at large, like, it's not like what we've seen is interest rates have come down and jobs are, and like hiring is still bad, or, you know, inflation has come down and hiring is still bad. It's like, no, inflation and interest rates are still bad. Like they're still very, very bad. And so that's why I'm kind of still thinking that it's that, but I would definitely change my mind if, you know, say interest rates drop to 0, everything in the economy is doing well except tech, and then it's like, yeah, then it must be something like that.
I mean, my prediction will be the job market will come back, but slower because of these things. And, you know, like take your organization as an example, right? I like to see your, like the way you're running your business as kind of a model example. The best case scenario with AI, basically, you know, this, you know, idea of like, okay, my organization is more efficient. Let's hire more because efficient, you know, because it's efficient. Like I can hire more people, you know, we can grow the business, become more competitive, all of that. That's great. I wish more organizations were like that, but some organizations were more like, hey, let me fire 50% of my developers. Let's see what happens. Some people are like on that extreme. And, you know, at the end of the day, it's their business to run, but I feel like it's too early for that.
I'll say 2 things here. One is, first of all, not saying that I'm always doing the right thing, but a lot of business leaders do just make poor decisions. Like that does happen. It's not like all, you know, C-suite executives are oracles that know exactly what to do in every situation. But what I will say is, you know, Boot Dev, we've been growing very quickly and we've been very profitable. And so the idea of like, we're productive, we're shipping more stuff and we're growing, it's pretty easy to just make the decision to like reinvest that, right? Like, got more cash, let's hire another person, got another person starting in 2 weeks. Like, we'll just keep doing that. That's really only true if you're like profitable and growing. If you are a company that's like, you know, you got slammed in 2022 and 2023 because all of a sudden, you know, everyone was buying shit online in 2021. 2022, people stopped buying shit online. So a lot of companies went from profitable to not profitable. Like, it is probably the correct decision in that scenario to, we got productivity boosts. Great. We're still not profitable. We got to make cuts here and we can still get the same amount done. So it's like the idea of thinking about your capital as a profit center or a cost center. If you're working in a profit center, then like a part of the business where if we do more, we make more money. A good example of this is like at Boot Dev. If we ship more courses, we can sell more courses and we make more money. And if we can make more courses more efficiently, we'll just hire more people to do that. And like, it keeps growing. Whereas like a cost center would be like, you know, if we have some internal developers that like work on the billing tool and we don't make any more money if our billing tool is better, it just like needs to be maintained. If now one person can do the job that used to take 3 people to do, it's like, we're not going to hire more people to do more billing center work. We just have to have a billing center. So it's like, there's some nuance there. I guess that's all I'm saying.
That's fair enough. So this might be like a little bit speculative, but I feel like there's, you know, difference in different people's mindsets too. Some people's mindset, you know, I think you're more in this camp where basically you want to grow the business. It's sort of like, you know, I have a business, I want to grow it. How do I grow it? How do I make more money? By hiring more, by investing more, right? But other people's mindset is like, how do I make more money by spending less?
Yeah.
But that's kind of a more pessimistic mindset.
Absolutely. It's definitely a more pessimistic mindset. And again, like this is why I bring up the fact that like, some business leaders are literally just making the wrong decision. Like they should be investing in growth and they're not. But sometimes it is like the right decision. Your business is shrinking and therefore you probably should be cutting costs. But yeah, it's hard to know. And what just kind of the last thing that I'll say is like, we as humans are so unbelievably influenced by news. So like when news gets bad, people literally get more pessimistic and stop investing in growth, not because like the money disappeared, but like they're just nervous and they're just scared. It's kind of like how when you hear news about the economy being bad, you're less likely to quit your job. It's like you're just nervous. Nothing fundamentally changed about your job. It's just like you're being more conservative. And so I think we go through these kind of it's like the stock market. We go through cycles where people are optimistic and everyone's quitting their job to go get a new job, to get a big pay raise, and everyone's optimistic. Companies are hiring. And then people get pessimistic for a while, right? And everyone's being conservative. Companies aren't growing as fast as maybe they would have a few years ago. Not necessarily because they don't have the capital, but they're just a little bit more nervous.
Right.
And those cycles definitely happen.
One last thing I want to share. Since people at this point probably listen to you for like 60 minutes, 50 minutes, however long it turns out to be.
It's great. Yeah.
Little treat maybe. So I was laid off from my previous job, and there is like a quick thing I want to kind of tell everyone about it, or share with everyone. Basically, right before I was laid off, I was thinking, okay, I knew the cash position of the company roughly, and the runway roughly, and the growth rate. I was like, okay, the cash position is kind of tight, but we need to invest more because, if the business doesn't grow, we can't raise more. So, they're going to die basically. But they thought the opposite way. They're like, that cash position is tight. We need to do a layoff. That's why I was laid off. I was like, oh, bummer. We'll see what happens. And then, I think it was like last week, or maybe this week, just a couple of days ago, I was checking their LinkedIn. I happened to be checking their LinkedIn and I saw that they went out of business, and they said they went out of business because they didn't grow fast enough. And I think it's possible that even with more investment, they would have still died. But at least, they would have had a, better fighting chance, I think. So there's definitely something about the mindset, where do you have the mindset of growth, or do you have the mindset of kind of cutting costs?
This is a really good point. It's important to draw the distinction again between like what I would consider two different types of companies, which is like the company you were at, I'm guessing, was like a VC-backed company looking to raise another round, right?
Yeah.
And in that scenario, it's like you don't even need to optimize for profit at all.
Right.
You need to optimize for raising the next round, which usually just means like showing growth, whatever important growth metric that is, like a bunch of new users, a bunch of new usage, so that when you go to investors, you can show them with confidence, look, we're growing. We just need cash so that we can keep growing. Whereas like, my business, for example, Boot Dev, we could raise money. I mean, you always could raise money, but like we're growing profitably. And so we don't have a runway. Our runway is infinite so long as we stay profitable. And the way of thinking is very different. It is more about, how can we be efficient and grow without, losing that runway. But that strategy that you outlined there is very important to understand. That the way you were thinking, I would argue, probably was the correct way to think in a VC-backed company. It's not, we need to cut costs. We need to like try to stay, we need to try to get to profitable. There probably was no path to profitability in that amount of runway. So it's gotta be, we gotta get to Series A or we gotta get to Series B.
Yeah. So a couple more examples, quick ones. I know a lot of people have, a lot of stuff to say against Elon Musk, but look at Tesla, right? Like they went out of business. I think they almost went out of business in 2008.
Yeah.
Because I think they were spending a lot, but eventually they survived. And the same kind of thing with, or not the same, but if you look at XAI, I thought they were nuts, like raising all this money and saying like, we're going to be better than ChatGPT. I was like, no way. But it turned out they did end up publishing, the best performing model on public benchmarks. Sometimes I think you need to play to win. You can't just play to survive.
I agree. I have been very amazed in the last year because I think you probably thought this too. I'm guessing based on how you were talking, like my assumption when GPT-4 came out, so like, which was kind of the big one, right? Like,
yeah,
ChatGPT came out and like a week later they were like GPT-4, everything's changed. It was like, no one's going to fucking catch up. Like, yeah. OpenAI has a monopoly. No one's ever going to catch up. It's going to be like Google all over again. We're going to have OpenAI for the next 20 years. They'll be leading the way. That hasn't been the case at all. Like over the last year, everyone's caught up. Everyone's publishing new models that are good at different things, which is very good, frankly, for like the rest of us that don't own OpenAI shares. So anyways, it's been very interesting that it played out that way. No,
it's super exciting. And it's like you said, it's good. Like, I tweeted recently, if you look at Gemini, you can use Gemini's latest model for free, unlimited usage. That's kind of crazy. And, Claude is good. Grok is good. So many options now. I guess DeepSeek too.
Yeah. Yeah. I need to play with Grok specifically and Gemini. We power Boots with 4.0 and now going to be 3.7.
Nice.
But I think we're going to plug in a few more providers and just keep testing. I don't see any reason not to. So
I think if you look at Gemini and DeepSeek, they're probably more cost effective than GPT or Claude. So they might be good options too.
Yeah, I will say, like, just because of the way our economics work out, like, it is kind of expensive to run 3.7, but it's still we're still at a low enough spend where I'm optimizing for just like high quality responses. Nice. So I've been hesitant to like, save some cash. If we were like, if our margins weren't good, I would probably be looking at that more seriously, but
cool.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks so much for coming on, man. Just before we wrap up, any places you want to plug to the listeners to go check out what you're working on? Channels, socials, anything like that?
Right. Honestly, the best place is probably Sourcegraph's YouTube channel. And I mentioned it specifically because I've been running these meetups, events in San Francisco, and I would give talks and I would record them and edit them, publish them on YouTube. I'm kind of, I guess, like a full stack DevRel in that way.
Nice.
So yeah, feel free to check those talks. They're not too promotional, I would say. Like they're more educational. They're like, 100% like ratio. So help us keep that. Yeah. And if you are more curious about me, personally, find me on LinkedIn, find me on Twitter.
Awesome. YK Sugi, aka CS Dojo. Thanks so much for coming on, man.
Thank you so much for having me here.